have turned it some preliminary reflections, because it's the output of, let's say, the last 25 days, as opposed to this gigantic and impressive scientific building which Professor Yamaguchi has erected in the last 25 years, with a lot of labyrinths needing the driving license. Okay. The question is, or the idea is, can we combine public money and circular economy? So the approach for the presentation is, or the overview is, first tell you my ideas about my approach, then show the economy as seen by mainstream economics and what that in reality means, and then proposing the circular economy as an alternative and demonstrating in a very simple model the transition from a linear to a circular economy and the role of the public money can play. So the approach is not as often justified to find out how our present economy works, but let's say to start from the opposite, ask myself, what do we need for a sustainable future, respecting physical planetary limits, and then design the economic system accordingly, so that it is economically, ecologically, and socially sustainable. And then transfer these ideas and designs into a model and check it. So the economy as seen by mainstream economics is a very simple one. You have this output GDP, we have a production capital and the investments, and then consumer goods. So it boils down to the simple monetary equation, Y is I plus C. And it's linear because it's only throughput. And it doesn't know nature, doesn't know raw materials, doesn't know waste. That's given in abundance. No need to worry. And the promise is that of everlasting growth. Every limit can be surpassed, be it by substitution of things running out, or by innovation, making things out of nothing. And interest by the interest rate system and the interest on interest is growing exponentially. That would be fine, but reality is different. We have planetary boundaries, and there is a ceiling to material growth. And only fancy figures can grow without ceiling. In nature, only logistic growth is possible, as exemplified by the lowest line. Some growth in between, but then leveling out at the ceiling. So in reality, this linear economy looks more like that. We have raw materials which we put in, and at the end, everything put into production capital or consumer goods comes out again as waste. So we have very important material flows which are neglected in mainstream economics. And so the nature as a source of raw material is neglected, and nature as the sink of all wastes is also neglected. And thereby it's neglected that waste has consequences, huge externalities. And by this linear thinking, nature is consumed. That's, let's say, the approach of resource economics, which only think about what is the most economic way of consuming nature, not how to deal with it sustainably. So concerning raw materials, the mining sector produces a huge amount of waste, mostly toxic, with a massive destruction of nature, as seen by these two example pictures. And the real use of fossil energy, as we all know and are confronted with, produces huge amount of greenhouse gases, which have turned our climate into a deadly man-made climate, tipping points approaching fast or being surpassed already, and let's say hell is coming. So the consequences of this real neoclassical economy is exploitation and destruction of nature far beyond planetary limits. Going to that, what Antonio Valero has named Thanatia, the opposite of Gaia, not the living earth, Gaia, but the dead earth, Thanatia, to the German, the Greek god Thanatos. We are flooding nature with a huge amount of wastes, etc., destroying biodiversity, etc. On the social side, we have in some parts of the world, let's say here in our rich countries, an affluent society, and in the rest of the world, but not only in the rest, but also some here with us, 800 million or more hungry people. A very unfair distribution of wealth, where the super rich 1% owns 50%, and the poor 1% owns, poor 50% own 1%. And the fight is sometimes very violent, with much violence to secure the profits. You can read often that environmental activists are killed, and the overall business model is dependent on growth, which goes into deadly growth. And that's combined with a green colonialism, where the rich today also think that they are entitled to the Earth's resources for their green transformation, as the Western colonialists in the 19th century thought that the wealth of nature belongs to them and no one else. So the summary is, all may look reasonable from a business point of view, but from the overall perspective, it's not ecologically sustainable, not socially sustainable, not economically sustainable. And as we see in the last few years, not geopolitically sustainable. So sustainability should be the target, or is proposed as the target, but from many only with lip service, not with true actions towards this goal. Yes, I just skip over it. Sustainability has to do with being able to continue our present way of living forever, respecting future generations, respect nature, etc., etc. And the least thing in this respect is the economically side, because the basic things which have to be met are the ecological side and the social side. And then we have to design and control the economic side to meet the other two, and not vice versa. So there are a lot of levels of sustainability, physical ones, which are very basic, circular economy, as I presented here today, concerning the raw material side. But there are a lot of other layers in this physical part. And then a lot of, I have called it abstract layers, public money being one, the Muratopia economy, and the universal system that Yamaguchi has proposed also. Well, what is okay. The rescue can come by a sustainable circular economy, which phases out the exploitation of the planet to get to virgin natural resources, and instead use the accumulated waste from all the sectors via recycling to provide the raw materials for the future economy. Putting figures to this picture, we have material flows which have to balance. That's one constraint put on this economy, and on top the linear system has the downsides of just exploiting nature and flooding it with waste instead of making the best use of waste. I have put these thoughts into my minimal model of a circular economy, which consists of 5 sectors, assuming that mining and recycling are more or less one, with the transition from one to the other. And then, as Marx has used it, in the investment goods sector and the consumer goods sector, the households with their consumption and the government. And there are a lot of constraints in this type of economy. On top, you see that volumes of materials going through must balance. In the middle, that the volume of labor has to obey certain rules. And in the bottom row, that the values associated with the material flows have to obey a rule. And that's a thing using accounting mechanics, having reminded me of the Saltenmechanik that Wolfgang Stützel has used. And this type of system gives often counterintuitive results, because mostly we think from a business point of view and not from the overall view. So using this model, I have refrained from showing now a lot of numbers, but instead summing it up. We have a start point with 100% of raw materials as extracted from nature, as shown in the figures in the diagram before, and 100% of waste put back in nature. So a 100% throughput economy. The figures chosen fit together, so we have economically a stationary, balanced economy, but of course it's ecologically not sustainable because it exploits nature on and on until nature is consumed 100%. Overall, highly unsustainable. So the idea is to use for the transition a government tax of 100% on raw material, on virgin raw material extraction in nature. That makes the recycling sector competitive. And the mining sector loses competitiveness by that. And the government action is to be able to secure the downstream activities as before with sales volumes and prices, that government buys from the mining sector their output at their increased price including tax, but sells it to the recycling sector at the initial price. So downstream sectors are not impacted. And in period one, the transition goes to 10% of raw materials coming from recycling and 90% remaining from mining. Because the mining sector has, in anticipation of this transition, decreases its output. And the model shows that the extra costs which the government has by buying the mining output at is covered by the tax. Only what the recycling input that comes from waste is not covered. And in the model, it's assumed that there is a fairly high price. So the recycling sector needs a subsidy for this part of its input also to secure that the downstream sectors are not impacted. So and that goes on. And after 10 or 11 periods, we have fully 100% circular economy. But government has accumulated a debt which in the model doesn't bother because downstream all volumes and prices stay as they have been. So public money behaves, let's say, as neutral. And the end point is that we have a situation that is sustainable from the economical and from the ecological side, and I could add also from the social side, insofar as the whole workforce is fully employed as it was in the start point, and the wages are as before, and the wages can buy the whole output of the consumer goods sector. I have tried several scenarios, let's say parameter settings, and well, it shows that mostly one ends in a downward spiral because the situation at the end is that the wages are not enough to buy the consumer output, so that the upstream sectors decrease their output in the next periods, which means that they lay off workers, so that the wages decrease further and the gap remains. This situation, as described before with government action, which keeps the economy stationary, we can have it also remaining stationary with a raw material efficiency increased, so that the raw material input is no longer 100 but only 60 units. And if we establish a service sector, even the annual deficit could be of the government could be avoided, but at the cost of putting the burden of this 60 monetary units on the workers in the service sector, which get their wage dumped from 100% in the other sectors to only 50% in the service sector. But this established service sector could take up the 120 laborers from the other three sectors if they would adapt their workforce from the 100% to 60% output level. Another basic fundamental scenario is that we have no tax, but we impose on the mining sector to internalize all external costs, which means that their costs rise. I have termed that here 100% price shock. And also in the without action of the government, all ends in a downward spiral. There is one scenario where not only the downstream sectors, but also the mining sectors reduces their output from 100 to 60%, and the service sector is established. We have the same situation as above. And this downward spiral is independent of the wages being held constant or decreased or increased. These model runs show that an adaptation to price shocks is by as easy as neoclassical mainstream pretends, by showing us their X diagrams where they move the demand curve and the supply curve, and then it adapts and the curves are shifted back, and we have a new equilibrium. And the most critical part is if we want to decrease this government deficit, is raw material efficiency, not capital or labor productivity. And the model runs, let's say, show also that benefits of labor productivity have to be put into leisure time, as already John Stuart Mill proposed it, not to labor reduction, because that would lead to imbalances on the labor market. So the role of public money, first short characteristic of the two scenarios, the tax and the internalization obligation. Both would give a price shock to downstream industry if nothing happens. But if government tries to act, it can protect downstream industries from this price shock by paying with public money for the extra costs that arise. So primary effect is that there's a money injection to cover the additional costs, without effect then for the downstream industries with respect on volumes and costs, including employment and wages. And the secondary effect is, presumably none, because public money created bears no interest payments for the government and is not paid back. And the model runs show that in the aggregate picture, the situation in the downstream sectors stay constant. But that should be put to further analysis. As a remark here, public money could be seen as a kind of replacement of former tax revenues. On the right side, you see the corporate taxes, which the red line, which have gone down in the last 60 years or so from 50% to 15%. And the marginal income rates, which have been after the Second World War often in the region of 80 to 90%, which are going down, have gone down to approximately 40%. And the taxes on capital income even lower, in Germany only 25%. So taxes have been cut, with the result that former tax revenues are no longer there. What the government has given away went into the pockets of the rich and super rich. And that was the intention, because the lobbyists persuaded the legislators that the private sector can make better use of money than government, forgetting the fact that only government can be in deficit, private sector cannot, and insofar is very reluctant with investments which bear too much risk and offer too little interest. So I see a synergy of public money and the circular economy coming from two sides to stationary economy. And I think we need not be afraid by the term stationary economy, because stationary is not static. There is room and need for further research, getting smarter and smarter, making better use out of the waste, optimizing recycling, optimizing many things. And it offers also the promise that, or can offer the promise that people are not laid off when labor productivity is increased, but get more leisure time and have use for personal growth. So the summary, a stationary circular economy, raw materials coming from waste, the recycling rate of 100% was seen by Bob Ayres as possible, but even if it's not 100%, that can be compensated by improved material efficiency. And growing population can also be compensated by improved material efficiency. The public money component of this economy removes the growth imperative by interest rates and debt growth. And public money has also the big advantage that it's instantaneously available as it is needed. There's no time needed for nudging the super rich to persuade them to invest in infrastructure projects, etc., education which promises too little profit. Of course, rules for wise use of public money need to be developed. So when I spoke of government, I didn't mean the prime minister or the chancellor or the president, but an independent state authority which takes care of the rules so that the system is not misused. So overall, very short, the system can be ecologically sustainable, socially and economically, and even geopolitically sustainable. Thank you for your attention.